Sega Classics Collection, a compilation of remastered classics built from the ground up for the PS2. The control scheme, graphics, and even the soundtrack were all redone and updated, and while Sega Ages did have a pretty low budget, you can see and feel the passion the developers had for the games. Golden Axe, Tant R, Bonanza Bros, Outrun, Alien Syndrome. This was my childhood. And freaking killed Sega Ages. This did terrible. While I was having fun playing with my parents, everyone was trashing this. Clunky controls, bland textures. People were not fans at all of the visuals, saying that the magic and feel of the originals were just gone. You know, I think I'm starting to notice a trend here when it comes to complaints about remasters. Well, yeah, you aren't exactly a kid anymore, so obviously the magic that you experienced back then isn't gonna be there. And while sometimes this critique is warranted, sometimes it's not. So the creator of Sega Ages saw the reception for it, then decided that the whole lineup was bad, took the series out back and euthanized it. Then the original Sega Ages as we knew it was dead and buried, and in its wake are just simple ports for the Switch now. First up on the list is Alien Syndrome. This is one I played every now and again. It was never my favorite, it was always a little too spooky for me. I never made it past the second level, at least I think, because I would always either die or quit. You shoot with the right stick, like if you were playing on an arcade machine. It's alright. Speaking of moving, it's a little clunky. You can definitely tell this is an old game. On the D-pad, it's fine. You got 8-way directional movement, but with an analog stick, it sort of feels like analog movement, and at the same time, it doesn't. It's one of those things where you have to experience for yourself. It's not bad by any means, but it's definitely not the best. So you have your power-ups you can get throughout the level, the best ones being the laser and the flamethrower, because they're basically one shot. You have hostages you need to rescue before you can leave a level, and with the level design mostly being tight hallways, it can be pretty easy to get overwhelmed. This one, it's still kind of pretty spooky, but I did play the original one on Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection, and I died on the very last level. But from what I remember, that was quite a bit a long time ago, so I don't know which one I would prefer. You know, but it would be cool if Alien Syndrome made a comeback now in the modern day, either like through a remaster or completely new game, but with Sega focusing on the Alien series, I don't think that's gonna happen anytime soon. So up next on the collection is Columns. It's Columns, alright, with updated sounds and music. We all know the format for these types of games. Line up 3 of the same shape or color to break a rule. I've never been good at these types of games, just Puyo Puyo. I'm digging this Roman aesthetic though. This is another one I played back on Genesis Collection. It's basically a 1-for-1, you know, endless mode versus CPU mode, local co-op. You know, there's really not much else to say, you know, just Columns. So up next was Fantasy Zone, and this is one I never got. I just never knew what to do. And combine that with me just not being good, I never played this one. I just found it a bit boring, and I still kinda do, but now I know what you need to do, and it's destroy these big things down here. But it has a nice aesthetic, the art style is also really nice, and it's pretty colorful too. It actually reminds me quite a bit of Kirby, which isn't a bad thing, but to this day, I've never seen anything past the first level. So, no reason to start now. Skipping ahead, we have Monaco GP, a Formula 1 racer. But why is this one called Monaco GP when the Monaco GP isn't even on here? It's a top-down racer, it's alright. You have the option between choosing the classic mode and the remake mode. In classic mode, you just drive around avoiding the other drivers until you finish the race. In the remake mode, or original as they call it, it's more in the style of Mario Kart where you go around still avoiding the other racers, but now you can knock them out with power-ups you pick up. It still has its top-down view though, but you can see a bit more ahead of you. But if you're just that big of a fan of the original camera, you can switch to that too. It's okay though, it was never my favorite, because I'd rather have been playing virtual racing. It's still a classic to this day. I've talked about this in the first Sega Ages video. Most of what I said can be applied here because this is still a really fun version of the game. 3 laps around a track. Simple but fun. For cars, you have the MP44, a blue MP44, yellow MP44. You have a few camera angles here. Drivers chase far, really far. Hey, there's a beach here. You can even race with sequential gears. Again, pretty fun game, and it'd be cool if they remastered this or at least remade it. So anyways, from one game I've already talked about to another, Space Harrier. The original was fun, fast-paced, and really kept you on your toes because of how fast it went. The Sega Classics Collection version, however, it's just not the same. They ruined it. It's nowhere near as fast. Where's the stimulation? Instead of objects zooming past you, they just sort of float towards you. And the gun is semi-automatic now instead of automatic like in the original, so that ruins the shooting too. This is way too easy now because of how slow everything is. They just have to clutter the screen with enemies so you can actually die. The good thing about this though is that it looks a bit nicer. There's actual tessellation in the ground and you have a bit more attack options, and the music is pretty cool, and I would just sometimes just play this and die just to hear the game over music because I found that one to be pretty cool. But other than that, I'd rather just play the original, unlike Outrun. Rounding off the trilogy of games on here that I've already talked about, Outrun keeps that fun gameplay from the original but with kind of updated visuals and a new arrange mode, which is basically the base game with a new map to race through, and also you have rivals. Yeah, I would say this new map is pretty cool, especially the part in the city. So cool that it's even featured on the game selection screen. And also Splash Wave is the main theme song for the whole collection. I don't know how they chose it, but it's cool. They remix it and everything. It has this guitar theme. The song is definitely one of those things that's stuck with me all these years. So back to Outrun, you could never go wrong with it. Race to the end before time runs out with little to no margin for error. It's a pretty fun game you can turn on every now and then and always have a blast. So next up is TANR/Bonanza Bros. We'll look at Bonanza Bros first. It's a fun game about two brothers stealing stuff. It's pretty challenging because while you can take enemies down in one shot, they can get back up and also take you down in one shot. You won't get up without wasting a life, however, though. Now you can always change this to the max of 7 lives from a default of 3, but if you're not careful, those can go by pretty quickly. The maps can be pretty big too, with multiple pathways. I played this one on Ultimate Genesis Collection too, and it's not too different from the original release. There's not much you can do with it because it has a pretty simple art style, but this is one I would play a lot, and I've even beaten it a few times. My favorite level was always the one where you could squash enemies under hydraulic press because it was pretty funny, but I no doubt suck at this game now because I couldn't even make it that far. But pretty fun game overall. It would be cool if they ever remade this game or at least remastered it for modern gen consoles. I don't think that's likely though. So now is TANR, the other half of the game. Might as well bundle these two together because since TANR seems like it takes a lot of assets, or at least the general idea of Bonanza Bros, and flips it. Two guys, in this case detectives with the exact same statures, try to get a bad guy, which I think is just this guy from Bonanza Bros. Even the Bonanza Bros make a quick cameo in one of the mini games. Yeah, this is basically just a minigame compilation. Not like a Mario Party though, more like a Brain Age. Some of these you really have to use your brain. There's reaction minigames, memory games, games where stuff flashes across the screen and you have to count it, and some where you really have to think. It's an interesting one because I'm not as good as this as I once was. I'm just gonna ignore what that says about me as an adult compared to when I was a kid, but most of these are doable. Except for the Ronin minigame, that one took all my lives. I had a good amount of lives, and this one took them all. You have to find which path on the bottom matches the one at the top. Maybe I'm just dumb, but this one was tough. They could be diagonal, vertical, and in reverse. There's multiple ways, and you could be looking at the correct path and not even know until the timer runs out. I do not like this minigame. Other minigames, though, aren't nearly as tough. The next toughest one I think is the one where you have to guess how many blocks there are, but that one never popped up for me. So 10R is pretty good and the controls carry over surprisingly well, for some of them at least. And so yeah, the reason for 10R being a brain age type game where you need to use your brain is due to video game and arcade culture in Japan being way different than it is here. Here it's all about button mashing, having fun, and figuring out complex controls like in Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat. While in Japan, it's more about using your brain and educating the youth. So that was pretty interesting to learn. So while I was bragging on about 10R, most of them being pretty easy and me not being as good as I once was, that doesn't really say much since I think I've only ever beaten this whole thing once or twice, because it's actually pretty long from what I remember. There was I don't even know how many stages, and you'd have to get one stage around one guy and then you have to get through, and then the next you'd have to go through 3 before you could advance to the next stage. So yeah, this one was pretty long and tough, which explains why I never beaten it except for maybe once or twice. Would a remake or re-release of this game work now? I have no idea actually, but for one thing I would know for sure, I would always get pretty excited when I would reach the end, which I think from memory is that you would have to find a code or something, or no, you would have to find the bad guy. He would be hiding in this combination like a C4, B2 or whatever, and you have to find that on the map somewhere. I remember that one. I remember I actually liked that one a lot. So anyways, with 10R being done, there's only one more left we get to look at. Golden Axe. It's being remade. Again. So, Golden Axe is a 2D hack and slash released for the Genesis in 1989. I played it on Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection back in 2012, and man, it's really tough. You'll die a lot. But that wasn't my first time with this because it was actually in Sega Classics Collection. Yeah, not a lot of people like this one. It's a remake, so it's still in 2D, but now there's more stages, a PvP mode, and an endurance mode. It's a bit easier at first, but it definitely gets harder the later stages. When I was a kid, my dad and I played the daylights out of this one. We would play this a lot, and I remember the first time I played it with him, I quit because I got scared of the Minotaur boss. I eventually got over it though, and eventually we got to the point where we made it through the entire game without dying once, until we got to the final boss, Death Adder. That's when we started dying, so I've never made it past stage 13. So that was a few years ago. Back then, I got lucky if I made it past stage 8. In the original, the furthest I ever made it was Deathbringer, but I could never beat it. I would always die because it always seemed pretty cheap. But he's not in this one for some reason. Played it out though. This is kind of boring. Maybe my interests and tastes have just changed. I'm way older than I was back then. But maybe it's also because Golden Axe just hasn't aged the best. At the end of the day, it's still a 2D beat 'em up, so it gets pretty repetitive with the same 4 moves. You have your normal attack, the 180, the charge attack, and the magic attack, and depending on your magic level, it can be pretty weak or pretty strong. And then you have your 3 characters to choose from. You have Axe Battler, Cyrus Flare, and Gilius Thunderhead. They all have extremely similar movesets though. Another thing is that in multiplayer, you can hit and kill the other player by accident. Not me and my dad though, we were pros. We had this whole strategy where either one of us would take either the top or bottom row, and then the other would take the opposite. And that was a pretty good strategy obviously, since it got us to Death Adder without dying. The best thing I would say about the remake though is the music. The Golden Axe music was already a banger, and then just reorchestrated it, and then you got some really, really good music. I can listen to it on repeat for a pretty good while. They really went all out with it. It's such a cool soundtrack. So, the new Golden Axe remake that's coming out has a lot to live up to when it comes to the soundtrack. So, that was Sega Classics Collection. Was it good? Was it bad? It was fun. There were some stinkers, there's some good ones, but overall, I would say the good outweighs the bad. 10R, Bonanza Bro, Outruns, VR, and I guess Monaco GP. And I wouldn't say Golden Axe and Alien Syndrome are bad. They're still fine, they're just kind of boring, and I could just not understand Fantasy Zone that well, but it still looked nice. But Space Harrier, ugh, that one was completely ruined. So what am I supposed to do to stimulate my brain now?